in the comments as well.
Thank you.
Let me know when it happens.
I think we are good.
Do I have a thumbs up?
Yep.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is Antoinette Peel, Chair of the Joshua Johnson Council, an affiliate of the Baltimore Museum of Art. The Council is one of the oldest African-American arts groups in the nation. At this juncture, we're 37 years old. Joshua Johnson Council was established as and connected to the Black community as an affiliate group to, look, I'm losing my words. Was established to connect the Black community to the museum. The first by simply increasing the attendance of people coming into the museum and then influencing some of the museum exhibitions and programs, largely associated with the education department. The Joshua Johnson Council has been able to further their work by directly engaging with the local artists community, doing studio tours, bringing artists into the museum for presentations, and now opening up to the public's talks with local artists through our Facebook Live. And as a result of that, we are here with Ernest Shaw, and we'll turn it over to Dave Issa to introduce our artist of the evening. Dave.
Hey, good evening all. Thank you, Antoinette. I'm Dave Issa. I'm the manager of community engagement here at the BMA. What you are with us here this evening is JJC Talks, which has been the Joshua Johnson Council's COVID-19 virtual pivot. This is something that we've been doing for quite some time. Our council has been in existence for 37 years. And the one benefit of COVID-19 is that we've been able to bring our meetings and what we've been doing forever to a more public audience. So we encourage you all to learn more about us and the work that we do that's been taking place for quite some time, and to please support us. If you like what you see here tonight, we will post something in the Facebook comments, a link to where you could go and support. But yeah, like Antoinette said, we are really excited to start our year off with Ernest Shaw. If you are a creative in Baltimore, a maker, anybody who has been paying attention for a moment, you have undoubtedly encountered Ernest, and his warmth and kindness as a human is only matched by the explosiveness and the brilliance that's emanating from his work. I want to read a little bit about his bio because I don't think you can encapsulate him in just a few words. So forgive me as I read off of my phone right here. But Ernest Shaw's work illustrates aspects of the duality of the African-American experience, exhibiting the dichotomy through an array of media and concepts. The most prevalent aspect of the artist's work is his use and understanding of color in the figure. The figure in his work is a continuation of a rich history of African and African-American figurative art. And his use of color demonstrates a deep level of understanding of rhythm taught to him by several West African drum instructors. Artist Ernest Shaw Jr. was born and has lived most of his life here in Baltimore, Maryland. Mr. Shaw comes from a family of visual and performing artists. As a youngster growing up in West Baltimore, there was never an absence or influence or inspiration, thanks to the support and encouragement of his parents. Ernest, I actually met your mom one time, and she just spouts off about how incredible you are. I just had to slide that in there, sorry. He appreciates them all the more as he recognizes that it is not easy to raise a child artist. Ernest is a product of Baltimore City Public Schools, where he graduated from the Baltimore School of the Arts and where he currently teaches. He continued his education with a BA in art from Morgan State University and an MFA from Howard University in Washington, D.C. In addition to teaching in Baltimore City, he is also an adjunct professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Ernest, we're really excited to have you here tonight. At this point in the night, it is my duty to stop speaking and pass the torch to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I first would like to thank Joshua Johnson Council for having me, and also thank the BMA, Baltimore Museum of Art. I believe I watched Jarrell Gibbs talk. Outstanding work, outstanding presentation, and this is an outstanding venue, so to speak, for artists sharing their work, especially during this trying time. You know, so I'm very appreciative for creating this platform for folks to continue to engage the community, right? So one of the ways I in more recent years like to introduce myself. Let's see if this works. Also, again, I'm a teacher, so the teacher in me, I'm somewhat proficient with Zoom, but we'll see, right? What do you see right now on the screen? I want to make sure you see what I need you to see. Do you see my home screen on my laptop?
Ernest, it's a white kind of bar in the middle, but
Got it. Not an issue. We'll go this way. What do you see now?
you see your home screen, but it is pixelated. I think it's getting there.
All right. That's all right. We'll figure it out. How about now?
Still slightly pixelated. It's coming. There we go. We're here.
You good now?
There it is. Yep.
All right. This is my introduction. I'll say no more. Let me know if the sound is good. I don't know what that is. I can't see it. I want coconut custard. Yeah, that's your sweet state. Yeah. So, the teacher in me prefers for this to be interactive. So what I normally, after I show that, I ask people who are watching or members of the council, if that's the visual representation, the aesthetic representation of my life, what does that tell you about me? And that's an actual question.
There is so much packed into that video. There are a lot of influences of yours that we see in your work. We see that family is very important to you as it is laced throughout that presentation. The underlying jazz also says almost like the rhythm to which you do everything. It has its own cadence in how you do your work. And so it almost says you're without words who Ernest Shaw is.
You speak for the collective.
I didn't, well, normally, you would do more of the talking, and so the questions would come through a chat. So tell us about that. Tell us about how the influence of your childhood, all of the fraternity things we saw, and ending with the family reunion. So the whole idea of how you chronologically and chose that particular piece of music to set that tune.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
So the original visual autobiography was like 5 minutes, but that's too long, to introduce yourself, But I 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes. That's around a good time to hold folks' attention, right? So I created that in the tradition of Arthur Jafa's work. He does a lot of visual video montage type esque work with music. He's very heavy into incorporating music uh, with some of the visual stimuli. So the title of that piece is Countdown, I believe, John Coltrane, right? John Coltrane is on my Mount Rushmore of individuals that's influenced me, individuals outside of my family, individuals like Nina Simone. And of course, over time, there are more people who are added to the list. But W.B. Du Bois, Nina Simone, um, John Coltrane, of course, James Baldwin, definitely, Malcolm X over time. And it's an extensive list, but there's some who are a little more influential than others. But definitely, I'm very inspired by jazz music. Um, very inspired by John Coltrane in particular, his life story, his work, his evolution, things of that nature. Um, so you got an opportunity to see some of my work there, right? Uh, what I'll do now, before I go into that, that's really a representation of my family and community, which is uh, a tremendous part of my life, right? Um, I can't, now I'll say I've turned 51, right? I'll be 52 this year. And I have to say, the older I get, the more I recognize how blessed I've been to have the parents that I have, and the balance I had with my mother and my father. Beautiful extended family. My parents in particular, father, um, provider, we were raised off Bethlehem Steel, right? Even my brother and I found out later, my grandfather worked at Bethlehem Steel for a time. My brother and I worked at Bethlehem Steel for a few years, but my dad retired from Bethlehem Steel. Uh, and there wasn't a day, well, I'll say it this way, my 6th grade graduation gift was an oil paint set and an easel and some canvas, right? So I'm 12 years old, and that's my gift. That was a gift to me. Uh, of course, and again, I'm the older I get, the more I tell this story. But I literally used to sit at my mother's feet and watch her paint. So not only visually am I watching my mother manipulate medium onto a surface, but I also smell the oil paint, right? I also can smell the turpentine or the linseed oil. Um, and I can literally watch um, her pieces evolve. As a child, the influence or the impression that has on a very young mind, living in a 2-bedroom apartment building with my uncle, 2 brothers, mom and dad. Again, this is the early 70s too, right? So this is during a time where neighborhoods were a little different. They were a little more vibrant. And again, this is in an apartment building used to exist. It doesn't exist anymore, called Carver Hall on Division Street, right around the corner from Pennsylvania Avenue, a block over from Pennsylvania Avenue. So you got to think, all our needs were met on Pennsylvania Avenue. We needed food, clothing. If someone wanted to socialize, whatever needs you had, they were met within a several block radius. So West Baltimore, or that time, late 60s, early mid 70s, I mean, we had Black Panthers that lived in our apartment building, older folk, younger folk. It was very impressionable. And you know, because my uncle was a musician, so I had an amplifier and an organ in my bedroom that I shared with 3 brothers, and his musician friends would come over and spend the night. We had cowbells, bongos, merengas, claves, you know, all these things in my bedroom as a child. I mean, what can you say? Like, I mean, that was my lived experience during my very impressionable years. I will say this before I show my art as well. After the age of 6, I did not attend a neighborhood school. I was recommended for Baltimore's first GATE program. So I was plucked from my neighborhood and placed in an environment at 7 years old we had students from Mexico, Vietnam. Again, this is the early mid 70s. Different socioeconomic, backgrounds, very diverse educational experience from age 7 all the way up through adulthood. Because from Hartford Heights GATE program, I went to Roland Park. From Roland Park, I went to Baltimore School for the Arts. But I will say, I do remember the moment that I fell out of love with education. Loved art class, loved music, loved the theater, but the academic aspects, and it wasn't due to a lack of intellect or ability, it just didn't feed my spirit. So I did enough to get by academically, but the drawing and painting and other things helped, it kept me on track, educationally speaking. So I'll leave that there. I had a great uncle with a PhD in art. How many people can say that, right? My grandfather's youngest brother, Dr. Luke Shaw, had a PhD in art when they still offered PhDs throughout the country. Let's see. Any questions so far? As we navigate.
I want to ask, have you always done portraits? Have you done anything other than portraits?
That's an excellent question. Well, when I was 5 years old in kindergarten class, I remember the very first time.
Did you say kindergarten?
Actually, let me go back. I remember this vividly, and I find myself telling this story over and over. My younger brother, we're 3 years apart. He was crawling around in his diaper on the floor in the living room. My mother was sitting at a profile angle watching soap operas on a 13-inch black and white television. And I was trying to draw her profile. So if my brother was in diapers, I might have been 3 or 4 years old, right? Children don't draw profiles. To this day, I remember the pain and anguish and the tears that was shed because I couldn't get my mother's profile correct. To this day, I still struggle with profiles. But that moment, fast forward 2 years removed, or 2 years later from that moment, I remember the first time my art teacher used my piece as an exemplar, or used my piece as an example of what the teacher expectations were of everyone else in the class. I remember the feeling of failure and the feeling that I felt when my teacher held up my self-portrait and said, "This is what I'm looking for." And from that moment on, I've always done portraits. I've always done, or figurative work. It's just, and yeah, pretty much. That's the best way I can explain, or I can answer that question. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is my one of my websites actually. And I'll start with this drawing, which is my most recent drawing. And it's of a young man named Otabanga. What's interesting about this sketch is that it was done on an iPad with an Apple Pencil. A friend of mine, Sam Holmes, saw a sketch that I had done, and I had posted it on social media. And he shot me a gift certificate or a gift card for an app for drawing. Funny enough, my students at Michael, they was using this app and had been using this app for years. So I bought the app.
I'm not hearing anything.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I can.
Yeah.
What's the last thing?
I heard you bought the app.
Okay, so I bought the app, and not since graduate school in 2005, 2004. Our professor was Michael Platt. He's no longer with us. But he exposed me to using the computer as a medium. Prior to that, I was fully analog. I had no interest in using the computer. So I give thanks for his influence, because simply the computer is just another means to communicate what you need to communicate. He also told me I wasn't an artist, that I was an image maker. And I understand now why he said that. But so this is a rendering done literally on an iPad. And I actually enjoyed the process. And this young man's name is Otabanga. Otabanga, also spelled Benga. If you're familiar with this young brother, in the early 20th century, he was, as I understand it, captured and brought here to be exhibited in the World Fair. Somehow he ended up in the Bronx Zoo, being exhibited in the primates exhibit. There were some humanitarians at the time that saw that. Eventually got him out of there, moved to Virginia, and several years later, he committed suicide. That's the basic story of his life. However, he was from the Congo area, and he's most known for being or being part of the exhibition in the Bronx Zoo with primates. So often I'll do portraits of young brothers and sisters who are not well known to my Baltimore City school students, my high school students. And then I may juxtapose some of those portraits with some of their portraits to sort of create awareness, but also an understanding of what it's like to be a Black child in the context of an anti-Black world. So I'll move forward from there. This is also the sketch just prior to this. I did this sketch right before the last sketch. This is, well, does anybody know who this is actually? Again, the school teacher in me. This young brother's name is George Stinney Jr. And to date, he is known for being the youngest person executed by the state in the state of South Carolina. I believe it was 1944, wrongly convicted of killing 2 young white girls. I believe they were sisters. He was snatched from his home when his parents weren't there by the authorities and coerced into a confession by being given ice cream. Never saw his parents again. He was convicted and put to death by electrocution. 14 years old, he was so small and frail, they had to prop books underneath him to raise him up high enough to be electrocuted. In the books, ironically, the books that they used were Bibles. So again, if you look at this, this is simply a sketch of a very young man, right? I like to, again, sometimes show my students these sketches right before or after I show them sketches or photos of themselves. It's just an alternate way or alternative way to teach history, right? Rather than just give them some literature to read. I just think this is maybe a more effective way of exposing them to some history. I'll do this. These are some of the portraits of my students. It's part of a series called either Be Cool or Too Cool for School. And again, much of my portraiture, much of my portrait work comes out of the African and African-American experience. But in a way, at least early on, I sought to combat some of the negative images and negative stereotypes, stigmatizations that are put out intentionally to demonize young Black people in general, but especially young folk my students' ages. So these are simply portraits of young men in school, in either their school uniform or with a backpack on. And by combat negative images, let me be clear. In no way am I attempting to only show or depict beautiful renditions or positive renditions, but honest renditions with as much clarity as possible. So these are actually charcoal drawings, and they're pretty large, actually. They're 38 by 50 or 50 by 38 inches. And rather than go through each one individually, this is another portrait. I will click this one of George Stinney as well. I did this one. This is also 50 by 38 charcoal. It's probably the first. I've done several portraits of Joe, of this profile. Again, fascinated with the profile. I did another series of work. This series is influenced by the fact that once I got well over 40, no, maybe in my early 40s or around 40, I began to become aware of an epidemic in the Black community specifically. And it was that of sexual assault on young women in the Black community. And as someone who was in his early 40s, I was floored literally by the amount of women older than me, my peers, and younger that I did some research. And I was really potentially devastated at the percentage of women that in some way, shape, or form had been sexually assaulted or molested by individuals that they knew. And how, raised by mostly men in my family, how that is kept so quiet in the Black community. So I created a series of drawings dedicated to Black women and girls who are forced to wear a mask or forced to return to a sense of normalcy. And I can't imagine the multi-generational trauma or the practice of that, wearing that mask on top of the mask that traditionally most African-American people or Black folks in America have to wear anyway. So that inspired me to dedicate some work to those women and girls. There's another piece dedicated to, or another piece in that series. I'm not going to spend too much time on any one piece. So in some of these, so either the mask or the sculpture comes from traditional Africa, pre-colonial African culture. To make a long story really short, as part of my thesis work at Howard University in Washington, D.C., I initially wanted to do the definition of an African American, and all of my professors on my thesis committee convinced me to not do that. In some way, shape, or forms, I did also want to begin to dispel some of the myths. Well, I don't want to call them myths because some people really truly believe that. I will say some of the theories that, as a byproduct of being prisoners of war through the transatlantic slave trade, that we were stripped of every or all aspects of those things that made us African. I tend not to believe that. And through research, study, traveling of my own, I have gathered enough evidence to think different, or to not believe that. So in much of my more recent work, you'll see some references relative to traditional African culture, pre-colonial African culture. This is also a sketch of a picture I took in 1996. No, I'm sorry, 2006, on a trip to Guinea, West Africa. It was my third time going to the continent. And I just saw this older woman with a young baby on her back, and she allowed me to take her picture. So I've done, and I think you may have seen in my visual autobiography, I actually showed the actual photo, and I've done a painting of that as well. So this was just actually a study I did on the iPad prior to the other two sketches. Let me go out and take a look at some paintings real quick. So this is some of my more recent work. The piece to the left, actually I'll click it. This piece, I was commissioned by HBO to create a piece that exemplified the spirit of Baltimore as I knew it. And the movie that the piece was commissioned, I was commissioned to paint the piece, really in the spirit of the movie. 12 O'Clock Boys was the original documentary that it was, an adaptation or an extenuation. And I can't think of the movie. And it just came out a few months ago, the name of the movie.
City Kings.
City Kings, yes, thank you. The movie was actually a lot better than I had anticipated. There were aspects of the movie I could appreciate. I actually watched that movie with my students, my high school students, because the movie was shot in many of their neighborhood or different parts of their neighborhoods. So I chose to paint two models, two young men that modeled for me on the corner of North and Maryland Avenue, to what we call squeegee boys, to represent actually the spirit of Baltimore, especially the spirit of West Baltimore. And this piece is called Crossing Guards. This probably is my favorite, one of my more favorite paintings. This is one of my students at Green Street Academy. It is the first piece that I painted that I actually added or drew a mask over the face as a painting. And that's the Kafwibe mask. and this is the male version of the Kafwibe mask. I'm not going to go into, due to time, I'm not going to go into specifics on that, but lack of better terminology, the Kafwibe mask, one of the roles of the Kafwibe mask is to maintain order, or it's used ceremonially to maintain order. I'm not going to use the word police, but it's used to hold people accountable in their society. But this is one of my favorite paintings.
It's a beautiful piece.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is one of my most favorite people. Again, being raised by men in the inner city of one of the toughest cities in Baltimore, and being a very sensitive person, being raised by mostly men. My father was a very nurturing, or is a very nurturing human being. So I'm not surprised that I'm as sensitive a human being as I am. Father, probably one or two of the more compassionate people I've ever known in my life, helped me come to understand James Baldwin in my 30s. And Baldwin helped me peel away some of my patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, homophobia, things that I had picked up and acquired, not intentionally, but simply growing up as a Black man, 70s, 80s, early 90s, in the inner city of the United States. Even going to school, going to the schools and having the relationships with people I had, Baltimore School for the Arts, Morgan State University, Howard, those places, when it was time for me to be introduced to Baldwin, he was easily digestible to me because of my relationship with my father, being nurtured at 2 HBCUs, 3 really, because I also attended Coppin for a period of time. Having the loving men in my family, brothers, cousins, uncles, goddad. I was surrounded by beautiful, beautiful, beautiful men, loving, caring, nurturing, compassionate, Black, and empathetic Black men, many of which were heterosexual, but they all weren't. But so when it came time to really get into Baldwin, it was palatable and digestible. And it was easier to peel away some of the transphobia and the homophobia and the sexism and the patriarchy and the misogyny. So I'm very thankful for this man, not just his writings, but his fearlessness and not just a writer, but an artist, a fearless person that really just tackled, or he wrote in a language that cannot be denied, and I'm just very appreciative that I've had a time, or I've had an opportunity to internalize his work. So I probably, other than my daughter, I've probably painted more portraits of James Baldwin than anyone else. And this is titled St. James on the Cross. It's 72 by 36 inches. Again, this is probably one of the first paintings I did relative to that series of work that I did that was dedicated to Black women and girls. That again, and let me add this to that series. That series is also relative to the mask that they wear, relative to what we consider to be beautiful, or the standards of beauty and how Black women and girls have to navigate that. Watching my mother, wife, and daughter transition to natural hair styles. All of that, very influential on my work. Again, portrait of James Baldwin, 40 by 60. another portrait of George Stinney. This is called Sirius George. Sirius spelled the way Sirius, dedicated to the Dogon people of West Africa. And but I'm not going to go too deep into their understanding of cosmogony and cosmology. But I'll just say that I was fascinated to find out. Actually, and I remember watching Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy used to do an In Search Of show in the 70s, I believe. And he did a segment on the Dogon, and I remember that. So as an adult, I did a little studying on the Dogon, and I was just fascinated in how, their knowledge of the stars and how they knew about the Sirius constellation without any aid of a microscope. And there's evidence based on mass making ceremonies and rituals to suggest that they've had this information for over 2,000 years. So it's pretty controversial, but very interesting. This piece has two titles. It's called Civil Rights, rights, R-I-T-E-S. And I spelled it that way relative to the rites of passage that of young Black men into manhood. I read a book called Black Rage, written by two Black psychiatrists, I believe in 1968. And they talk about in the book, and this is also relative to young Black girls. In the, relative to whiteness, white supremacy, white privilege, systemic racism, is it really ever possible for Black boys and Black women to achieve manhood and womanhood if in fact the ideal manhood and womanhood meets a European standard, and the psychological impacts of that, much of which is unknown or part of the subconscious. So that inspired, this is also called Ibeji, which is Yoruba for twins. It's a deity, one of the Orisha of the Yoruba faith. We don't really have time to talk about that as much. Of course, Nina Simone, one of my sheroes. Again, someone who sacrificed so much, relentless, fearless individual, and someone who used her work not necessarily for her own self-aggrandizement, but to educate others. Thelonious Monk, another influence, another portrait of Monk. Again, portrait of one of my students. And y'all can feel free to stop me. This is a piece that if I'm full transparency, aesthetically, I have not fallen in love with yet, but it is a piece that is pretty popular. It is actually what I would call a piece that's like a gateway into another style or an evolution or the beginning of an evolution to some more mixed media type work. So I'm appreciative of the piece. It's just it's a struggle for me aesthetically. And if I'm moving too fast, just let me know.
Ernest, there is a question about since you're on the paintings, about the drippings. And Deborah asked, does the use of drippings in your work have special significance?
They do. They do. The first time I stumbled on this medium somewhere around here. There are these water-soluble pastels. They look exactly like crayons, but they are not crayons. They are very expensive, but they're these water-soluble wax pastels or oil pastels. And what it does is it allows me to draw and paint and to experiment. I really love to draw. And for years, I was afraid of painting because that required that I experiment with color. But again, funny enough, I spent relatively 20 years studying traditional West African music, drum and dance. And part of that, or simultaneous or alongside of, while I was studying that, I began to experiment more with color. So using these water soluble pastels helped free me. I do have a friend that is a Yoruba priestess that told me early on when I was experimenting with this that the drips and along with that struggle with the realism was actually a representation of my two children. My daughter is someone, and she knew my children. My daughter being someone who is very serious, goal oriented, um, sets high expectations for herself. Um, she's my struggle with realism. And then my son, very outgoing, always told jokes, um, um, sometimes inappropriately, uh, free spirit, very compassionate, empathetic, like many of the men in my family. He represented the carefree, abstract, dripping. So the combination of my relationship with my two children, that was the way it came out. That was the way she explained how it came out in my work. But I don't believe in mistakes, especially in artwork. The very first piece my mother was super critical of was the first time I experimented with the drip technique. And by very critical, I mean she was brutal. And but I was used to that. But that's when I knew I had a breakthrough. That's when I knew I was onto something. When it was something my mother was like, did you mean to do that? So my mother who used to drag my brother and I to her classes. And we used to sit and watch her in class. So I respected her opinion. This was the first time I had created something. It was actually 21 years ago, 2000. I did a piece for a symposium at Hopkins, and she didn't like it. So I was happy about that. Again, a part of that series of creating portraits of my students. Another painting of Baldwin called Blues for Mr. Charlie, which is actually one of my favorite plays. It was written by Baldwin. Another portrait. Painting of Oda Banga, we talked about him earlier. Sun Ra, who later on, once I began once my studying of jazz began to evolve, once I got around to, I'll tell it this way. When I began to listen to some of Coltrane's later work, I began to understand the influence of Sun Ra's saxophone player on Coltrane. Once I began to understand that led me to Sun Ra. This piece is a piece of a young man who used to live on the corner right outside my studio. He literally lived on the corner. And this piece was titled Elegba initially, but it's also titled Christ on the Cross of North and Howard. I'm not going to go into the symbolism there due to time. But a remarkable, talented individual, and he literally lived on the corner of North and Howard at that intersection. Wole Soyinka, Nigerian playwright and activist. It's a portrait of him. Now you can really see that water-soluble technique. It's the first time I had done it on canvas. Normally it's on paper or wood, but the use of that water-soluble pastel. And yeah, I'm gonna have to spend some time with that piece now that I see it again. This is in Wazor, who was had become a famous curator in Europe, also from Nigeria. He helped usher, or he helped, I want to say, force the Western art world to accept or take another look at contemporary African art and include it in mainstream art world. He passed not too long ago, so I painted this and didn't know too much about him until he passed. And I started to study and read up on him and his significance relative to contemporary African art and Black art of the diaspora being recognized. One of my more recent pieces, again, and I have been trying to push to become a little more abstract. That's like a 10-year battle. And this is one of my more recent pieces, titled Pensive, and it's 72 by 48. My work is also getting larger. And this is the last painting I painted. This is the same two men that work on the corner of North and Maryland as squeegee. They call them squeegee boys, but these are actually young men. I was going to do some murals, but I'm looking at the clock. I think this might be a good time to take some questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Let's see. I will ask one specific question. I noticed the recurring use of that blue, the color. Is there something significant about that particular shade of blue that is sort of thematic in your pieces?
I do have an affinity to the color blue. To make a long story real short, the blue and white, my fraternity's colors.
Okay.
You may have seen that. I'm third generation member of that fraternity, so you may have seen that. Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, Epsilon side chapters. And I'm now a member of Beta Sigma, which is the Baltimore chapter. But yeah, there's blue and white.
Okay.
You're fading out.
Yeah. Your mic was fading a little bit, but
Yeah.
Blue and white on my fraternity's colors. Is that better?
yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm looking in the chat and I see some Facebook viewers say they see love of visual and musical art forms, the importance of family, and that's a reflection of your intro video. We talked about the drippings, and Susan Batter says, Ernest, this is such a fabulous talk. I've long loved your powerful and gorgeous work. Thank you. And are the mixed media the water-soluble pastels? And then that was the question from Susan. Would love to see a few murals, Rose. Would like to see. And there's a question about why they're so large and why are they getting larger?
Again, it's the same way I talk about the men in my families and the women and my parents. I've had some outstanding instructors. I mean, Guy Jones at Morgan State University, Morgan State University, Michael Platt, Sorrel Zadawale, James Phillips. I mean, I really, Stephen Kent, Baltimore School for the Arts, Carol Bayard, Baltimore School for the Arts. And at the time, you don't know how fabulous these people are because you're a kid.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't really know how wonderful these people are until you get older. Maybe you become a teacher yourself.
Yeah.
You look back and you're like, I mean, really, Guy Jones, I as a painter, I can't tell you how influential watching him, because he used to paint with us at Morgan.
Okay.
You know what I mean? He used to paint along with us.
Okay.
And and let me say this too about HBCU real quick. It's not just the classroom or the lessons. Especially for someone, because I flunked out of University of Maryland College. I was an advertising major, and that just wasn't a good thing. I pledged the fraternity. I had some fun. Whatever. But it was at Morgan and Howard where I really began. Angela Franklin, African American art history teacher, and after taking her class, after whooped my butt. African Americans art 1992. I went back and took every art history class I've ever taken, which I passed. I took them all over: history of art 1 and 2, modern art, African art. I took them all over. Seeing art through that lens, having that historical context,
right.
It changed my life. So Yeah, I don't even remember the question. I just want to say.
And then said, why were your paintings getting
Oh,
larger?
Michael Platt. I thought I was hot stuff. I was in a group show. I got my piece into a group show in DC just after graduate school, and I hadn't seen him in maybe a year or two. And he had a piece of the show, and he walked by me, and I was like trying to. It was very crowded. I tried to position myself, and when I finally bumped into him, we walked by. He just walked by me and said, "Get bigger, get larger," and just walked away.
Okay, okay.
So from that moment, again, he's no longer with us. But from that moment on, slowly but surely,
Okay, and I know I don't know how much of a time crunch we really are in, but I do, and what I think people could appreciate seeing your work around the city. So if you do have some time for a couple of murals so people can see just how well you are known for your work on the buildings around the city.
I'll make it quick. And I don't have pictures of my most recent mural here, but there's some that are dear to me, right?
Yeah.
I'll make this real quick. This is at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. I was commissioned to do the piece. I was actually a little shocked, but I was commissioned to do a piece.
It's beautiful.
Interesting place because Mercedes-Benz Stadium gentrified an area that was traditionally Black, right? So there was some controversy. And the people who hired me to, and I wasn't aware of this at the time, but the people who hired me to come down was a white organization. So I peeped game recognized game, right? So
Yes.
I peeped it, right? And before I go further, I want to thank one of my closest friends, Gaia, for suggesting that they bring me down from Baltimore, right? So once I figured out what's going on, I said, okay, all right, I'm going to do a piece dedicated to Black women and girls, right? And that's what this is. The two flowers are Georgia's two state flowers. One much more well known than other. One of them is dedicated to Native American or indigenous women who traveled in that direction during the Trail of Tears, you know. But yeah, this piece was dedicated to many of the Black women and girls who were part of the civil rights movement, whose name we will never know, or whose names are much lesser known than some other people, right? So this piece was done a year after that in Cali, Colombia, in South America. Long story short, they wanted me to create a piece dedicated to that city, a city which, if I spoke Spanish, I probably would move there because it's exactly like Baltimore. First time I had traveled somewhere on a different continent and didn't feel like I was in a foreign space. Beautiful, beautiful city, large African population. This is a piece again in Atlanta. Let me get to some Baltimore stuff. This piece is dear to me because it's a portrait of John Coltrane in Graffiti Alley, which is just beneath my window. Graffiti Alley is a very interesting angle. It's a very sacred, spiritual place. I think much of that, almost like what I would say is, for some reason, the energy of Graffiti Alley attracts people from all over the world. When they come to Baltimore, a lot of people, I've met people from Russia, people from South America, people from all over who come through Graffiti Alley for some reason. And
where is Graffiti Alley?
Graffiti Alley, right on it's an alley of North Avenue, in between North Avenue and 20th Street.
Okay.
It's right behind what is called the Motor House.
Oh, okay. I know where that is. Yes.
And it's interesting because the pieces are not permanent. You could paint and come out the next day and somebody's painted over your work.
Okay.
That's part of the culture there. It's not really insulting. This is a piece, Pennsylvania North Avenue, painted 2015 as part of a mural project. Maggie Villegas commissioned me to paint this from Baltimore Office of Promotion of the Arts after the the death of Freddie Gray, the murder of Freddie Gray. Yeah, this was in response, it was a relative part of the uprising that came after that. That's Ta-Nehisi Coates. Yeah, I'm not going to go into the symbolism too tough, but that's on the corner of Pennsylvania and North Avenue. Painting in Know Thyself in Kingston, New York. This is a second painting painted in 2000. This it's on the corner of Hollins and Calverton in Southwest Baltimore. Used to be a bustling neighborhood when I painted it. Best back in the day too was scaffold and all brushwork. That's actually my grandfather, my daughter, and my nephew. I don't even know if that still exists. The painting just on the other side of it was torn down. That's literally no one lives in that neighborhood now. My aunt used to live, my great aunt used to live right behind there. And her house was the last house on the block. The city tried to buy her out. And eventually they had to move because it was the only house on the block, literally. Again, what I would call my Trinity, Malcolm X, Nina Simone, and James Baldwin. Malcolm, who was influential to me in my 20s, Baldwin in my 30s, and Nina Simone in my 40s. So I guess I have to find someone for my 50s, right?
Where is that one?
This one is in East Baltimore.
The one, yeah, the Holy Trinity, East Baltimore?
Baltimore, Landvale. It's in the Oliver neighborhood.
Okay.
Why can't I remember? Or East Lafayette, I'm sorry. East Lafayette.
It's Lafayette and Barclay. I walk by it every day.
Yep, Lafayette and Barclay. And this was the first mural that Gaia trained me on using spray paint. So this was my introduction to spray paint, actually. First mural I ever painted. It's no longer standing. And it's a picture of children on the corner of Lyndhurst and Cranston Avenue playing on the fire hydrant, at the fire hydrant like we used to do during the summer, hot summer months. My mother made me go out and turn off the fire hydrant. And I told the children, I'll let you play as long as you let me take photos of you. And this was before digital cameras. So I took a couple rolls of them playing and then, turned off the fire hydrant. But this a byproduct of that road. As you can see, this entire block is vacant. When I took this picture, that no one lived in this neighborhood, so, which is crazy. Again, Graffiti Alley, portrait of Toni Morrison that I had done. I was sitting in Kevin's Nancy by Snack, which is right across the street from the Motor House. Kevin Brown's place, Kevin Brown and his partner's place, and heard that Toni Morrison passed. So, and it wasn't intentional, really. I just walked across the street and went upstairs, got some paint, and dedicated this to someone who Toni Morrison may be me in my 50s. Real quick, last year with my seniors, we read the book, The Bluest Eye, and then created artwork relative to the characters and the storylines in the book. And that book is extremely heavy, right? Her work should be required reading for all Baltimore City School students. That again, another Graffiti Alley portrait dedicated to Roy Hargrove. He and I are just a few months apart. Didn't know each other personally, but we kind of grew up together. Loved his work. He passed, tragically died of illness, and I just wanted to do something. So I was moved to paint this. That's just a few. I do have a lot more in the city. The one I really wanted to show you that I'm proud of is one that was painted in summer 2016 on Pennsylvania Avenue. There are these panels that replaced other panels above a beauty supply store on Pennsylvania Avenue that I painted with some Baltimore City school students as a part of this mural project called Art at Work. Maggie and Bopa and Nora from Jubilee Arts on Pennsylvania Avenue created this mural project, again, in response to Freddie Gray tragedy, where muralists, different artists from around the city would come together and train young people on the process of mural making, not just painting, but they're creating a proposal, canvassing the neighborhood for the, it was, I did it for 5 years. That's first year, 2015, myself, Megan Lewis, Amy Sherald was a part of that. Gary Mullen, just a fabulous group. It's a few other folks, just a fabulous group of people. This is a beautiful experience. And I would love to thank Nora and Maggie for that. Is that good enough?
Yeah, there's some comments in the chat that I just want to read out, some Facebook comments. One of them says, your use of contrast is incredible. Love mask imposed over paintings. Kevin Brown says, you're educating me and others. Love learning about the Orishas. Okay, Jesse Gavin says, you teach with every brushstroke. Christopher Batten writes on Facebook, the subjects of your pieces end up having a great sense of familiarity and communicate aspects of the sitter's spirit incredibly well. What are some things you think contribute to your ability to highlight those aspects of your subjects?
Two things. One, light. I didn't show any of the photographs that I take, because I mainly take photographs to use as subject matter for my paintings, but it's light. Light is the key. It's the key to everything. Now, I mean that literally and figuratively, because the goal is to capture the person's light or the person's spirit, really not their likeness. And I say that as someone who was traumatized as a 3-year-old trying to draw my mother with a black and brown crayon. Likeness is never the goal. Likeness doesn't simply come, because you can just take a photo and everyone has a camera now, but likeness doesn't just simply come by drawing what you see. So my main answer to that is, and I want to thank my parents for this, is that they helped me understand the importance of humility. And then humility puts you in a position to be able to connect with people, on a level you probably wouldn't be able to connect with them. Moving in space.
Someone commented about you painted over, someone painted over it the day after I saw it. So Gwen saw that mural, I guess, and then the next day it was gone.
Okay.
We made a special trip to go to see the Toni Morrison mural. And when we got there, only part of the face was still showing it. But I didn't realize that that was the concept for that venue.
So one other comment here says, so inspired in how you use art to teach life, to mesh fine art with books, history, self-pride, etc. Can't find words. Your students must leave enlarged.
Some of them. I don't know virtually though. This is virtual.
So I do want to ask you, Ernest, what's next for you? What are you working on now?
So, unfortunately, due to COVID, so I want to transition from education into. I've always been a full-time artist. I've just been full-time teaching and full-time. I want to transition. I would like to retire from teaching. Last year, for the first time, I applied to some residencies, and I got a residency at Vermont Studio Center, Mass MoCA in Massachusetts, and Yaddo in New York, and couldn't go to either of them. So they were rescheduled for 2021, and the first one has already been canceled or postponed again. It's going to have to be rescheduled. So, and residencies for artists are not simply CV or resume builders. Those are times or set aside, those are created so artists can actually work on their practice. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Focus on your work. You can actually get into it.
So I was really looking forward to that. again, I'm positioning myself to be able to transition into a life after teaching and focusing mainly on my artwork. So my artwork is becoming a bit more abstract. So watch out for that. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with Ernest Shaw or get some of his work or commission a piece, how would they do that?
I'm going to two ways. The old school way is my email, eshaw at eshawart.com on my website, or I take my students' advice and give you my Instagram, Shaw underscore art. But the
Say
young
that
people,
one more time. Say that one more time so we can catch it.
Shaw underscore art. There's some young artists, Will Watson and Charles Mason III, fabulous young artists, who are really, they say I mentor them, but they really mentor me. uh, how to use social media and just how to stay hip, what kind of hip. Um, well, if you get an opportunity, check out those brothers too, Will Watson and I think they have artists too.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you being with us and spending the time to have us get to know you, Ernest Shaw, painter, muralist, teacher. And I'm not talking about just the classroom. As somebody mentioned that you're teaching through art, whether you, maybe that's just who you are. You tell stories. So there's the canvas, there's the paint, and then there's the narrative that goes around it that allows somebody to truly connect with the work, thus connect with you. So I thank you for sharing with us this evening. I know it's been a long time coming for me to want to have you do this. So the fact that we get to do this virtually like this is beyond what I could have ever expected. So, and for you to give us such a well-rounded look into your life, because it's all on canvas, and the video was amazing. So I do thank you for that.
And kudos to you for what you all are doing. Um, it's a beautiful opportunity for us to continue to share that work during this trying time.
Yeah.
People are hurting, and art is definitely a way in which some healing can be facilitated. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, there's something else in the chat. Ernest has been an inspiration for me. So Tony says, Ernest has been an inspiration for many artists in Baltimore for many years. I remember seeing your work in high school at the Baltimore School for the Arts as a young artist, and I was blown away.
That's Tony Shaw. I thought that was Anthony McKissick.
Again, I thank you very much, Ernest. I know I'm going to throw it over to our membership person just so we can let people know how they can join the Joshua Johnson Council to engage in more talks. And I will say, this is not the last time we will connect with you and artists in our community. We want to be able to provide a platform such as this for people to know who we have in the backyards of Baltimore City, who are doing great things and encouraging and us to encourage each other to continue to spread the word about the great work that you and your artist peers are doing. So I thank you for that. Somebody says, love you, Dad.
Happy birthday, Aja.
That's Asha. Yeah, she said, I love you, Dad. So sweet. That was adorable. So Dave or Rose, you want to talk about joining Joshua Johnson Council?
I think it's me, Rose, right? It looks like it. Okay, folks, again, thank you so much to Ernest for being here with us tonight. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. You can take a look at our archive of JJC Talks on the BMA's Facebook page or on our YouTube page. You can learn more about becoming a JJC member through the Joshua Johnson Council's Facebook page, or if you just simply Google Art BMA JJC, it'll take you to our link. On the Facebook page, I also added a link to our page if you'd like to help support our work and what we're doing in any way possible. Next month, we have another really incredible painter with us, an artist by the name of Cole Peace. And we will see Cole Peace Thursday, February 11th at 6:30 p.m. And with all of that, Have a great night, everyone, and we are going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.